Rich? Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to the October 26th meeting of the Thurston Regional Housing Council. I'd like to do a quick check-in with everybody on who's here, and Tumwater showed up first, so why don't we start with them?
Thanks, Carolyn. Michael Althauser. I'm a member of Tumwater's City Council. I am joined by our city administrator, John Doan. I believe Councilmember June Cathy will be joining us as well. I think that's it from our neck of the woods today.
All righty. Hope to see Joan. Why don't we go to Olympia next?
Right next door in Olympia, I'm Jim Cooper from the City Council. We have our interim assistant city manager, Rich Hoy, and our housing director, Darian Lightfoot. And then Councilmember Madrone expresses her regrets. She had something come up and couldn't be here this evening.
Okie doke. Well, welcome back from Tennessee and Kentucky. Sounds like a fun trip. Alrighty, and Thurston County?
Yes, Carolina Mejia, Thurston County Commissioner, and I'm joined, County Manager Ramiro Chavez will be joining us here shortly. We just got done with budget meetings, but staff members who are joining us are Keely Marino, Tom Webster, and Jacinda Steltis, as well as Megan Porter.
Alrighty, thank you. And I'm Carolyn Cox from Lacey, and I'm joined by our Mayor, Andy Ryder, and Rick Walk, our Director of Community and Economic Development. And our city manager, Scott Spence, sends his regrets. And I see Ramiro Chavez, the county manager, has joined us. I'm going to check the participant list real quickly and see if there's anybody else that we should be acknowledging. Well, welcome to the other attendees who were on the call. We've got Ariel Benson, Carly Colgan, Jenny Milchenko, Jessica Olson, Megan Porter, and Trish Gregory. So welcome to the meeting. Has everybody had a chance to review the agenda? And if so, could I have a motion to approve?
So moved. This is Carolina.
Okay.
I'll second the motion.
Okay, it's been moved by Carolina, seconded by Michael to approve the agenda. Is there any discussion? Alrighty. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Okay. And Kelly has let me know that there is nobody signed up for public comment. I'm gonna just check and quickly make sure there's nobody who is on the call who wants to make a comment.
I see no hands raised, Chair.
Alrighty, thank you. Alrighty. Let's move on to minutes from our October 12th meeting. Could I have a motion to approve the minutes as submitted?
So moved.
Okay. I'll second that. Moved by Jim, seconded by Carolyn. All in favor of approval, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, we're good to go there. Alrighty, that was fast. So that gets us to the Franz Anderson proposal with Jacinda and Darian.
And I'm going to share my screen, so Jacinda and Darian will walk through the presentation.
Okay, great. Thanks, Tom.
Thank you, Tom. All right. Good afternoon, Regional Housing Council. Jacinda Steltis with Thurston County. Darian and I will both be walking through this. And Keely may or may not kind of jump in somewhere as well. We all three worked on it. So what we have before you all today is a proposal to develop the Franz Anderson site into permanent supportive housing. Thanks, Tom. Just a very, very brief background. This is about a 6-acre site, 6 parcels purchased with ARPA funds by the county and Olympia earlier this year. Go ahead and move to the next one, Tom. Very brief kind of map for those of you who are not familiar, or just a good reminder. And then our primary goals for the site, we are currently working with Department of Commerce to stand up a tiny home village on a portion of the site through the right-of-way proposal. That initiative is well underway, and those tiny homes will be getting started fairly soon. The other side of the property, the proposal or the primary goals for permanent supportive housing. So that's where we are focusing this presentation on. And the next slide gives a summary of permanent supportive housing. I'm not going to read it, but wanted to include it for everyone's knowledge. Thank you. So the project details, we are proposing to put out a request for proposals. The legal landowner is City of Olympia. The county again contributed funds, but Olympia is on title, so they would put that out. We are hoping to do that. I say we, Olympia is hoping to do that with help. The beginning of this coming year, around the February timeframe. And that proposal would essentially be distributed to developers and sponsors, affordable housing developers and sponsors, with an ask for them to tell us how they would develop the site into permanent supportive housing. So the rest of this presentation is kind of assuming that we'd be looking at approximately 40 to 70 units. That's fairly common. Again, multifamily, permanent supportive housing rental units. The population served low-income single adults, primarily homeless at entry. And just wanted to touch on that there are other projects that are in the works or planned that are senior projects or home ownership projects. So that single family or family projects. So the single family or single adult, excuse me, that's where that population served is coming from. There's still a gap around that population. Again,
Jacinda, can I say something?
Yeah.
I do want to say that on the west side of the parcel, there will be the tiny home village. And so this project will be primarily focused on the east side, but I'm hopeful that through this RFP process, we can request that developers submit a phased approach. And so the east side of the parcel will be developed into these 40 to 70 units of multifamily permanent supportive housing. But in their proposal, I'm hopeful that developers will submit a phase 2 approach, just like Unity Commons, just like Family Support Center, saying that once the east side is developed, folks from the tiny home village would be able to potentially move into the permanent supportive housing on the east side, and then development can begin on the west side of the parcel for that phase 2.
Thanks, Terry. So this request for proposals process is fairly common in the affordable housing world. That request would essentially make available or put up, for to solicit, I guess, applications for the land. The land, we would be selling essentially the land to the developer that is again owned by the city. And the developer, the winning bid essentially would be developing that property and then operating it as well. So they would own, operate in the end. The estimated cost for the project, again, based on that 40 to 70 units, we're estimating that at around 20 to 25 million. Thanks, Tom. So again, why this project? Why now? We're bringing this to you all now. If you recall, back in July, we had worked on the right-of-way proposal, and staff and tech team had let you all know that we will be coming back with a proposal for how to use other local regional funds and to satisfy our, or work toward satisfying our permanent supportive housing strategic framework. That was adopted by this body last September 2021, and calls for 150 to 200,000, or excuse me, 200 units. Wouldn't that be nice? 200 units funded by 2024. So not constructed, but funded. So again, this project is an effort to align with that permanent supportive housing framework and to carry that out. Again, it's property that is already owned by Olympia. It's already having some right-of-way work through the right-of-ways initiative to bring in utilities. So this is something that could be really attractive to developers in terms of the property is already there. We're investing a lot already, and it's essentially somewhat ready to go. Next, thanks. Just wanted to briefly, I'm not going to review this, but wanted to call everyone's attention to the fact that land is a significant cost in development. Go ahead and next slide, Tom. And wanted to mention to everyone again that selected developer would be owning operating. So they would ultimately be responsible for sustaining operations. There are a variety of ways that that could be done. Some of those sources are listed here. Very brief overview of the process. Again, looking today to kind of get buy-in, at least at the level of, going back and talking to respective councils on the project and starting to educate and move forward. Wanting to attract those developers, the proposals through an RFP in the February of 2023 timeline. Thanks, Tom. Selecting that developer by May. If any ARPA funds were put in, whatever those might be, those funds do have specific deadlines for tying those funds up. I won't go into that, but that is in the notes there. And then we look at really moving the project forward, and I say we, but really it's going to be the developer, moving the project forward and attracting other funding. The primary sources of funding for affordable housing, especially multifamily, are Housing Trust Fund and the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit programs. Again, within those notes is a pretty detailed schedule for when those processes applications occur. But it would definitely be, once that developer is selected, it's, getting off running and getting the rest of the funding in the next few months. So that would occur through the end of the year and into the new year, 2023, excuse me. Permitting would occur through City of Olympia. Again, this is City of Olympia property. We've included a very long permitting timeline. Hopefully it doesn't take that long, but we do know that there's certainly staff shortages everywhere, and permitting does take a while. And then again, depending on the project that the developer proposes and that we select, that construction timeline would be approximately 15 to 18 months. So looking at full occupancy by June 2026. Michael.
Thanks. On the previous slide, where you have ARPA in 2023, can you remind us when ARPA funds expire and if that money needs to be spent or if it just needs to be obligated by that date?
Yes. Yeah. So as of July of this year, I believe it is Treasury. I think I put in the source here. They need to be committed, obligated. So that could be via contract by December of 2024 and spent down by December 31 of 2026. So this project would meet those expenditure obligation and expenditure requirements for ARPA funds.
Got it. Thanks.
Tom, can you skip to slide 30? Oh, thank you. Things to consider. I feel like we've kind of already touched on that a little bit, but I do want to make very clear, which I think is easy to lose in all the things that are going on, that Housing Trust Fund and Low Income Housing Tax Credit are the two programs in Washington State anyway, that are essential for building affordable housing, especially permanent supportive housing, which is typically a higher total development cost per unit. So those are very important programs, essential programs, I would say. And we also have other projects that are very likely to be going after those same funding sources in this 2023 year. So one of those potentially being the hotel that is being purchased by Lehigh through the right-of-way initiative. Part of our conversations and agreement with the state and Lehigh around that hotel is to convert to permanent supportive housing. And the communication has been to them thus far, to Lehigh, excuse me, and the state, that process or effort to convert the hotel into permanent units would begin in 2023. So that's very likely. I think we should expect that Lehigh would be going after the same funding sources. And so again, with limited funding sources through or funding amounts through Housing Trust Fund and the LIHTC program, the more local leverage we can have into the project, the better. And the better the chances, again, that more than one project could be funded in the next year. So I won't review this whole slide, but essentially, the more local funding, the better. It will position us again to have at least 2 projects that are competing well and likely to score well in those 2 state processes and likely to be funded. And thanks, Tom. We'll leave a little bit of time for questions or thoughts.
Andy?
Yeah, when it comes to the question about obligating for ARPA funds, I do think that we need to try to obligate those as soon as we possibly can. I've been working closely with the National League of Cities, and the Congress has already attempted to take those ARPA funds already. And so even though it says 2024 and by 2030, I think that would be a big mistake if we waited till that long to obligate these funds. Matter of fact, we should obligate the funds in a contract as soon as we possibly can to make sure that ARPA funds stay in this region. So that's number one. Number two, have we thought about reaching out to Congresswoman Strickland on direct congressional spending? It's something that has come back to Congress and is an option for us, especially a regional project like this, I think would do very well. I know she's very interested in permanent supportive housing, and I think it would go a long ways and it'd be a high priority for her if we could get some congressional spending for this project as well. So I think it's something we need to take a look at and should be available for us.
Okay. Anybody else have a comment? Jim?
Yeah, I want to back Andy up on that. I think this is a perfect kind of a project for an earmark for a member of Congress. And then Andy, can you say a little bit more about your first comment? Because we all already have the money in the bank and have a contract with the federal government.
So as long as the ARPA, as long as you've obligated the money, then the chances are you're pretty safe. It's not safe until it's actually spent. But everything I've heard from National League of Cities is they are encouraging cities, counties to spend those dollars, obligate those dollars as soon as you possibly can, because there's already been an attempt to pull back on those dollars that haven't been obligated yet. And so I think we'll be safe if we enter into a contract that's so it's obligated, but that takes a long time to do. So
Right. No, yeah, totally. And I didn't want to distract from the go fast comment because I agree with that. It's a you know, and to be honest, the faster we go, the more need we can establish for future conversations around infrastructure and other things. So I think that's a good compatibility. So I have a couple of questions just said that this is awesome. I really appreciate that you bring it to us. On the tax credits, is the land value enough for the local match, or would we have to have some dollars on top of that that are directly match dedicated?
Yeah, for the tax credit program, for Housing Trust Fund and tax credit program, the land, the Housing Trust Fund requires neither require a match, but they require a minimum local leverage. So that minimum leverage threshold is fairly low to essentially get in the door. It's about 300,000, so not much at all. But the more the project is leveraged, the higher essentially it will score in both of those application processes. And both of those processes are also, don't want to get too into the weeds here, but capped kind of at a regional award level. So we don't want to be essentially bumping up against a regional cap if we have two projects that are going in. Again, potentially Franz Anderson and Lehigh with the hotel, and are both kind of minimally locally leveraged.
Okay, that makes sense. So the timing is critical in that, and the more funding in place first is helpful. Okay.
Yes.
And then I was curious, do you think that we would have the leverage in this agreement to mandate that the affordability be in perpetuity, and that the contractor or the operator uses our coordinated entry system for placement?
Yes. And I will also add that both Housing Trust Fund process and the LIHTC low income housing tax credit, both of those also have affordability requirements. I believe LIHTC is 30 and Housing Trust Fund is 30, maybe even 40. Certainly locally we can,
because we own the land,
whatever we want on it.
Right.
We can, yeah.
Okay. And we got really creative with our contract with Walker John around that on the property downtown. It's a long time. So, and then last question, just, and this might be, I'm not sure if this is for the advisory committee piece of this, but to me, the most important piece of your comment around competing with other local projects is having our pipeline in place. And so can you talk just a little bit about how you see that moving ahead? And is that like an advisory committee role or a technical team role that to make sure that we have these spaced out for the home fund and other funding sources as well the right way?
So I can talk a bit about that. I do want to also acknowledge that a few things. So we had talked about our combined Olympia and the county home fund. As we're talking through the governance structure and setting up our advisory boards and such, we talked, I want to say maybe last month or the month before, about having that home fund application process pushed back into the summer rather than rolled into this February RFP that the county usually does, just because advisory boards are, that's next on our agenda, but they're not set up yet. So home fund right now, we are targeting for that June RFP timeframe, and to have that process completed in time for whoever comes into the home fund, whether it's this project or Lehigh or whoever, to have those awards in place for them to lead into using that leverage as well for Housing Trust Fund and LIHTC if those projects pursue those funding. In terms of pipeline, and I'm not sure, Councilman Cooper, if I'm getting at what you're asking here, but there is traditionally we've had an affordable housing pipeline that has gone through, I essentially, it functions through the hat, and our pipeline is very much kind of all over the place right now because of COVID. So there were several projects that were kind of pegged for 22, 2023, and there's been a lot of shifting. So we are anticipating that we'll have application from Habitat CL Longmire for single family home ownership come in to our February RFP. But that question of who might come in on the affordable housing or multifamily side is a little bit up in the air because some projects have fallen out, some projects were able to go sooner, some projects needed to push back. So it's likely that we'll see a pipeline project come in that we weren't expecting. The county also did not issue our traditional request for information to establish, is that 2025 now? Because we're working on the home fund. So we were wanting to kind of have that in place. So there's a lot of moving parts and ambiguity around the pipeline right now.
Okay. Romero had his hand raised and then Michael.
Thank you. Maybe going back to the ARPA funds and the obligation deadlines and following up to Mayor Ryder's call for action, the sooner that we can get obligation of the ARPA funds, the better. And that is through a contractual document, as Jacinda stated. At least from the county's point of view, we need to make sure that this plan is gelling to a point in 2023, because the county cannot run the risk of leaving money on the table, ARPA funds, that we can redirect to other programs. So if this program is not gelling by late summer, early fall of 2023, the county is going to start developing a plan B for the expenditures of this money, because we will only have at that time only 14 months to spend the money. So I know that we're talking about the December 2024, but there's other elements that we need to consider to make sure the county does not leave any ARPA funds on the table. So I just want to clarify that a little bit from the county's point of view. And again, if this, I know the timeline presented to you works, and Jacinda and Tom have worked very well on this, but it's the unknowns and the what ifs. And the what ifs put us in the position to redirect and reassess the ARPA funds. We will do so just to with the objective of no leaving money on the table.
Carolyn, can I ask him a follow-up on his comment?
Sure.
Michael, is that Romero, does obligate mean contract with the end builder, or could we obligate through an MOU to the RHC?
No, a contract.
No, okay, thank you. Good.
Okay, Michael?
Yeah, I want to ask a follow-up to a question Jim had about keeping units affordable in perpetuity. If you do LIHTC, isn't that only last for 14 years? Like what would keep units affordable after that period expires? Is it just by warrant of the fact that we're paying for it, so we choose to keep it affordable after that point? Or how does that actually work to make sure that they're affordable in perpetuity?
So typically is what occurs when a developer is developing a property, and then this occurs currently with our HUD home funds as well. Each funder gets to set, essentially, if there's not already regulations, HUD says they have the least affordability period. Again, LIHTC is a 30-year affordability period. So any LIHTC award 30. Is a 30-year period. I think Housing Trust Fund is, I want to say 40, but it could be 30. So each funder essentially has their own affordability period. Again, the reality is these projects have multiple funders. So there's at least the 30 years because that's typically the minimum, again, for a LIHTC. And then if there's any funders that go above and beyond, they can do that. And that would happen through the affordability covenant, which is, signed and recorded legal document that says that affordability, it sets the affordability, the number of years, as well as the level of affordability. And again, it is, you know, a legal document that runs with the land. So even if the developer were to sell the land at some point, you know, that those restrictions would still be in place. For the LIHTC program, it's the tax credit. So I want to get too complicated here, but essentially the project is attracting tax credits. So whoever the investor is that is investing the equity and gets those tax credit benefits, that's a 15-year period that investor would get those benefits. And then at that point, usually the project essentially is restructured in legal terms. Sorry, restructured in legal terms. So the investor is out of the project.
Okay.
And we were able to extend our covenants with Walker John because we own the property, but it might depend on the what's allowable in the funding sources a little bit. So I just wanted to throw that as an addition. The challenge, Michael, is the longer you go and the lower the AMI, the less possibility of it penciling in the end. And so we really had to kind of play with the years and the AMI to get to a place where we could all agree in the negotiation. It's one thing, you know, it's great to want it all to be super low and permanent, but there's no way for them to build it.
Rick, would this be a good time to talk about where Lacey is with funding?
Yeah, sure. I can speak to that a little bit. As we know, with the status of ARPA funds and budgetary processes that we've been experiencing here at the City of Lacey, we had several weeks ago a budget workshop where we talked about a couple of different funding needs and how we're going to apply those ARPA funds. One of the things we want to convey is we're working on how we apply ARPA funds to some local Lacey needs, but also try to figure out how we can partner and provide financing for this Franz Anderson Road project. I think we're talking to the majority of council members. There's a lot of support for that. There's support at the staff level. So we're looking at a funding strategy that we can apply and commit local Lacey dollars to that. Now, they may not be under the term of ARPA, but they would be a funding proposal that we're working for, trying to get council approval. And if there's any questions of that, I'm happy to respond or ask Mayor Ryder if you'd like to add anything or.
Sure. And I think it's important for the RHC to know that Lacey is in total support of this project. It's just the color of money that is being used to fund it. And as Rick points out, I think in this case, in particular, what Lacey is looking at is actually using general fund dollars, most likely to fund this. And it's going to probably allow even more flexibility since it's not connected to ARPA and the time frame commitment. So, and we're looking at like $3.5 million as a commitment right now from Lacey. Now, I've had conversations with several council members, but I haven't had a quorum yet of council to run this by our full council. But I feel like that is a good number for us to sort of plug in for a commitment from Lacey, and that you know, that we're really excited about this project going forward as well.
Romero, did you have a question?
No, it was already answered. Thank you.
Okay. Not seeing any other hands raised. Is there?
Can I just ask I guess
yeah.
a question, and it's maybe it's for Andy or Rick, you know, just so we can help tell your story, because I know it's, you know, I think it's really important that, you know, the community gets that we have like constantly changing priorities, right, and alignment of the dollars. So is there a high level comment that you can add that talks about the shift from saying you want to put all of your ARPA into a permanent supportive housing to coming up with $3.5 million from somewhere else? Just because it would be helpful in a lot of circles.
Well, as I think what we know is, you're right, things shifted. We were planning on using all of our ARPA dollars for the hotel purchase, and then that got shifted out. And I think the question is how do we make sure we obligate our Lacey's ARPA dollars as soon as possible, so we know that they're obligated, which is something that we've talked about here. And there is, there is concern that those get obligated as soon as possible. We also have a huge need that we're trying to fill as well with a major, with the police station, which is $40-something million. I'm trying to figure out some funding there. What we know is with about half of those ARPA dollars equals about $3.5 million, and that we feel comfortable right now that we have in funding that we can obligate towards this. Like, we can set aside, so as this project develops, you have that much of a commitment. Now, are there other opportunities for other dollars that we can work to help this? I think that's an ongoing conversation we can continue to have. But if you need a placeholder dollar amount right now, the $3.5 million is I think a good number for this project, and that's that's where we're at the moment.
Cool. I really appreciate having that context and having it on the record, because I think it's helpful for us to all hear the reality of what you're thinking. And I think just in hindsight, we should all, I think all of us need to be more clear about, like when we're planning roughly like that and trying to figure out how to be more specific about citing or not, I think we just got to a place where we all thought we had something that wasn't written down and it wasn't signed, right? And to me, that's the hindsight to learn in this organization how to not get to that point, so that we know from the beginning how much, or each year how much we have to invest in this 200 units outside of the home fund and other funding sources. So I always appreciate the lessons we can learn, and thanks a lot for being real with us.
And I think at the staff level, we've talked about it quite a bit too, because when the funds were allocated towards the hotel purchase in partnership with the county, and that those funds are freed up, then we looked at these other needs and looking at future inflationary factors and community will in terms of taking on debt. We had to pivot and figure out a financial strategy that we can have assurance that we can reach this very needed public facility, but still try to partner in on this very important project for permanent supportive housing. So there were a lot of pieces, and that's what all that converged really quickly at the same time. And so trying to figure out how we better communicate those different nuances as they develop, to make sure that we are not competing for our own efforts. That makes sense.
Exactly. And one of the, it may come up during our governance discussion here, but I think one important element to note in there is that we have a communications element to the governance. And I think, communicating well amongst each other and not making assumptions about who's doing what and why and that sort of thing will help us all work together a little more harmoniously. So
right. And I would add to that, Carolyn, like sending some texts before a change hits the newspaper at the last hour.
Yeah.
Because and that's for all of us. That's not just like there's several other examples where we all need to walk that walk, not just a Lacey comment. So.
Well, obviously.
I do appreciate that, Jim. I do think, we're at the very beginning stages of RHC. We're still talking about governance and everything else. And it's so important that we all have each other's back and as much as we possibly can. And it's sometimes communication, it just happens so quick. Things can change so quickly, and where Lacey's been at a disadvantage is that we've asked Rick to cover like 1,000 different things. And what we're at now is we're finally getting to a point now where we're gonna have dedicated staff, in the budget for next year for Lacey. So we're gonna hire a housing coordinator, which we never had. We're gonna hire someone for climate. All these things that we've needed and we've asked Rick to do, all of it has been, it's always put Lacey behind the region. And so luckily we're going to finally catch up next year and get those staff positions filled, which I think will help a lot too going forward.
And I think Rich may remember this from State Office of Drinking Water, kind of the mantra of assume good intent.
Recording in progress. Recording
Yep.
in progress.
That was interesting. Okay.
I think Tom was trying to get on his phone because he's having internet issues. So that was what that was.
I was more interested about the recording in progress thing.
Chair,
but-
if I can make a point of clarification, so it will
Yes.
make an announcement anytime someone logs in.
Oh, okay.
So it's just alerting new logins that this meeting is being recorded, so no alarms needed.
Okay. Thank you. All right. Does anybody have anything else they want to say about the Franz Anderson proposal? If not, thank you so much, Jacinda.
I do, Carolyn.
Oh, sorry. Your hand doesn't go on my screen there.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank staff for a wonderful job, really. I know that it's been very difficult to try to adjust, so I appreciate really all of your work on this. Just how innovative you guys have been really in trying to put this proposal together and presenting it to us. We had a brief conversation with the county commissioners last week. And so I know that there were some questions, but I think everyone's just in the page where, they're happy to see a proposal. We have been talking about this for a while, I know. So just a thank you.
Thank you, Carolina. And Jacinda, is your hand up?
Yeah, Carolyn,
Okay.
before we move on, just want to make very clear, again, tonight, the ask from staff is just for you all to take this, back to your respective bodies, to start thinking and asking whatever questions of staff you all have in preparation for that request for proposals being issued in that February timeframe from Olympia. I know it seems like it's many months away, but it is right around the corner. So it would be really nice for staff to have some level of commitment from jurisdictions so that we can communicate in that RFP that there's regional support, and further communicate ideally, not necessarily a funding source, but a funding amount of local commitment. Because again, I think that is really important for helping to attract developers to the project. If they know about how much local commitment in addition to the land and regional support, it makes the project that much more attractive to them. And there's more, I guess, that's less work that they have to do through those other funding sources. So again, any questions that come up, can be funneled through tech team, and we will likely be back in a few months to talk more about this project as that RFP is being developed.
Jacinda, would you like to put a little bit of a deadline on that when you all would like to hear back from the jurisdictions? Because we're about to roll into holidays and all kinds of budget hearings and all this stuff.
So I will say as soon as possible, and I will also throw it a little bit over to Darien and Olympia. I know they are and are going to be further short-staffed and have a lot on their plate. That RFP would be coming out from Olympia. Certainly other staff will be helping. So if there's a deadline that Darien is looking at,
Yeah, I understand that budgets will be finalized for most jurisdictions in December. And so December would be ideal. December before the end of the calendar year would be much appreciated.
Okay. Very good. That way-
Carolyn,
Yes.
So just an afterthought I had was we started talking about this in public tonight, and as we take it to our other jurisdictions, it's going to be it'll quickly happen, as we've seen before, that there's a community dialogue that gets out ahead of us. And so I just wonder, are we ready to turn on neighborhood engagement around this and the tiny home, or is that part already happening? Because I didn't see that in the presentation, and I think it would be a good to add it in before we take it to our city councils for a presentation.
We are in the community engagement beginning stages. We need to execute the emergency housing waiver for the tiny home village, and in that process requires 2 community engagement meetings. And so those will primarily be focused on the tiny home village. And we can continue to talk about the permanent supportive housing on the adjacent parcel. We're in the very early stages, but yes, it's incorporated in there. And we'll have a more robust plan as this project evolves. But just getting the green light from you all this evening that this is a project that each community is invested in, and we as staff are given the support to move forward, we can make that more robust and ensure we're doing our due diligence.
Thank you, Darian. Okay, last call before we move on. Anyone? Okay, well, let's move on to the camp suite proposal follow-up. And that would be Keely on point for that one.
Good evening, almost. So the proposal is in your packet. Again, nothing has been changed, just as a refresher to have before you. Our intent was to receive comments from any jurisdictions on their thoughts on this proposal. I did hear from Jay Burney from City of Olympia and Councilmember Madrone from City of Olympia prior to this meeting. And so intending for this to just be a space where we can have that conversation. I will put out there that, this remind that this conversation started at public health between the public health director and public health officer, with the intent of looking at how we move forward in any future conversations around camp closures, camp sweeps. From a public health perspective, this is also something that the state is working on. I have been meeting biweekly with Noha Magoob, the senior policy advisor for Governor Inslee on homelessness and housing. And I did present this to her as for her to look at, and she was very excited about this prospect and let me know that Department of Health is also convening this conversation around how to move forward at the state level with looking at camp sweeps removals from a public health perspective, including best practices. So that being said, I would just love to open the floor for comments and questions.
Has everybody had a chance to digest the packet information? Would you like quick highlights from Keely? What 2 or 3 bullet points that she thinks are the most important, or Michael?
I don't know if I need, well, I mean, we all read it. And thank you for putting it together and suggesting. I think it makes a world of sense that we have sort of a uniform policy for how to approach these things across jurisdictional lines. That makes all the sense in the world to me. I think sort of the challenge that we're kind of grappling with or would grapple with is just the dedication of kind of a staff person to have another weekly meeting in perpetuity to try to develop those things. Like sort of what you alluded to previously, Andy, for us, we've had Brad doing all this work and have had only Brad doing this work. And the challenges on staffing is just obligating another meeting every week, and also making sure that when we do have the commitment to be there, that it's also the work in between those meetings of making sure we're analyzing and contributing in a meaningful fashion. Like, I guess I'm wondering if there's a model policy that exists somewhere that we could adopt, because it's a model policy for a reason, as opposed to creating another calendar obligation for our staff that I'm just a little concerned that we're stretched thin in terms of staff time for having Brad do all these things. And Brad also has a host of other work that is not related to housing and homelessness that we also depend upon him for. So that's sort of my initial knee-jerk reaction, but I'd also invite John to share any additional thoughts he might have from sort of our perspective.
No, Councilmember Althauser, I think you captured it really well. I mean, I guess if we could see if we can come up with the model policy and the guidance and process and direction that we can follow and take some of the pressure off the sort of regular meeting review of these sorts of activities, if that makes any sense.
I guess I would ask, I think that's a good idea. I would ask for feedback from Keely and Darian and Jacinda, whether you're familiar with that, whether that might exist out there somewhere. And
yes, so a lot of the Jessica Olson from our office is the person who drafted this and put it together and did the research. So the guidelines or the recommendations within this document come from the United States Intra-Agency Council on Homelessness. So our federal best practices for, I may be wrong to compare it to the CDC, but it's similar in that that's where we go to look for best practices around homelessness and housing.
okay.
I think that what is tricky is even though usage has been around for a really long time, it isn't weighted as seriously as perhaps the CDC with regards to best practices. So I've, in my conversations with NOHA at the state, the DES does it differently than DOT does it differently than Commerce does differently than the Healthcare Authority, Department of Health. So there's best practices out there, but they're not generally there's not tons of weight to them because the issue is so political. Whereas when it's a pandemic, the CDC, although people may have different opinions about the CDC, we rely on them to provide us guidance. So I think that the issue is always that homelessness and response to homelessness is very political. And so it makes best practices tricky. So there is a model. There are some models.
I want to ask a question and get an honest answer from our tech team. Is this topic something that could be woven into existing tech team meetings, or are your agendas already like hugely full and there's just not time for that?
I think that we do discuss, I'm not going to speak for all of the tech team, but what remains, the conversations happen at staff level for sure. What is different is that we don't have a guiding. I don't know how that's different than what we're currently doing, and what we're currently doing isn't coordinated.
Right. Okay. Any other tech team members want to weigh in on that?
I agree with what Keely says. We're trying to do our best, but if each jurisdiction has different standards on encampments, on closures, on sweeps, then it's hard for that to be filtered through a central body. So I agree. We're doing it, but it's just not standardized.
Yeah. And I would just to add on and agree with what's already been said by Keely and Darian. Having that protocols and standards helps with how do we communicate. So we're not trying to at the week prior trying to make sure we cover all the various communications. I think it would also extend out to including our each jurisdiction's on the ground resource units as well as doing the day-to-day, so that there's broader communication and awareness of what's going on in one jurisdiction or another, and in preparation for these events, and ultimately make it less traumatic for everybody and harm. Because ultimately, we want to make sure there's minimal harm done to not only the individuals but also to staff as well.
All right. Well, looking for suggestions on how we proceed on this. Jim?
Yeah, we have a couple of comments. So generally, I think from staff and Councilmember Madrone, in my perspective, yes, we should do this. Personally, I think that there should be a policy from the Board of Health that mandates whatever the final outcome is, because I think the significant health issues of bouncing people back and forth in the middle of winter are a public health crisis, as the county has declared. So to me, the highest level of authority should set a policy in place. That's just me personally. I want to make sure that's clear. It's not coming from other people on my council. A couple of comments from Jay Burney that I think are important to lift up, and one of them is to develop the actual criteria for what triggers a displacement. Excuse me, like, safety concerns or environmental concerns, and at what level. And then after that, the comment he made was about timeliness, right? Like, so we saw violence escalate at Deschutes Parkway rapidly, and we had to make really quick decisions. And so we need to have built into this system the ability to move quick when the need is more severe, right? And then the last comment was a little bit of we're kind of not all in agreement, but I'll kind of put it's a balance, I think, on the table. Is, some folks think we want to avoid the word sweep, and some folks think we want to be better at defining different terms. So I think the important thing is that we use definitions to make sure we don't create, animosity or harm through the words we use. And so the example that Danny gave was, Deschutes Parkway was a sweep. Like, it had to happen fast. And Ensign Road was a planned relocation, right? And it had a long ramp. And so kind of distinguishing between that a little bit and talking about the particularly the definitions. But I go back and forth on where I am with using the word sweep. I think it would be nice if there was a better word, but I also think that that's the word that, in some cases people understand and is the common vernacular. And, far be it for us to stop creating more jargon in our work too. So those are the comments we had. I don't, Rich or Darian, any additions from your perspective or anything I missed in that?
I would just add, I think Jay also raised a question about scale. Just
I skipped that.
Sort of the size of encampments that would sort of, go through a process like this. So I just want to add that.
Yeah, good. So like if it's one person or 10, what triggers? Cool.
Alrighty. Other thoughts about how we might take this concept forward? I agree. I think it's a good concept. Okay, I want to put Keely on the spot. In the best of all worlds, what would you think it would look like going forward?
Well, I think that, this is really helpful. All of the comments are very helpful. And Jet really wanted to get a sense, is there a general sense of buying it into this conversation and looking at this as a potential body or guideline or what have you for our community? I think that there are a lot of nuanced levels of this conversation. I think that I just connected with the Department of Health individuals that are also putting something like this together. I want to know what they're doing. So I want to be thoughtful about it. And yes, staffing is absolutely an issue. The Hazardous Weather Task Force is kind of what we were thinking of in this model, where there's a situation that's rising to the surface. We call together this task force, we look at our policies and guidelines, take in the individual, whatever's going on in the situation, weigh it against all of our policies, and then move forward with a plan from there. So that would be ultimately at the end of the day, how I would believe it would function. But there's a lot of work in there that has yet to be done. So I don't know if that's a satisfactory answer, but
Yeah, no, I mean, I wanted to get a sense of that. Another question that occurs to me, have any of our police agencies been involved in the conversations to date about this art approach?
no, it was just born out of our Department of Public Health. So we had several discussions with Dr. Abdulmalik and Interim Director Kurt Harden in development of this idea. And then we brought it to our leadership, and now we bring it to you. So it's just the very beginning stages.
All right. Well, our police department has been, and Lacey has been very involved and concerned about making sure, that we minimize harm and engage trying to help people into more stable housing situations. And we brought in mental health counselors and social workers and planning more of that. So I know, I hate to obligate them to more work, but I know there's a strong interest in Lacey in that sort of thing. And I would imagine the other law enforcement agencies would have an interest in being part of that conversation. So,
Carolyn, can I add something? Because you sparked a thought in my mind.
absolutely.
So it's not apples to apples, but when you were talking, I thought about the mitigation sequence we use for critical areas in land use. So if the conditions on the ground are such that the first priority would be keeping people in place. If there's not a permanent, if there's not a roof for them to go under, the first priority is to keep them in place. If it could be made safe and mitigated on site, versus an off-site mitigation, if you will, of the harm or the need that is then developed as the second tier. So we would essentially sequence the conversation similar to how we do a land use decision around a critical area. And I'm not trying to compare people to that conversation, but it just kind of sparked a thought in my head that's another place where we think about a path that's a step-based path. So sorry, I don't know if that would made sense at all or not.
Andy?
Yeah, I guess the only other thing that I think we need to think about is this a policy for people who are currently camping on public property and public right-of-ways? Or is this also a policy for people who are camping on private property? Because the one thing that we have to think about is obviously if it's on private property and a private property owner comes to the city, one of the jurisdictions, said, hey, I need to trespass these people who are on my property. we need to think about that too. We can't, we have a policy, we're not going to trespass people on your private property until, we need, that gets a little confusing, right? And so we need to, I think, differentiate between the private property and public property and how we go through this process as well. Does that make sense?
I am really glad you brought that up. One of the things that I would want to talk about in an effort such as this would be exactly that. So what I've seen in just my time here in Olympia, both as a provider and in the county as a staff member, is camps get pushed from public property to public property to public property. And ultimately, at the end of the day, if they have nowhere else to go, they end up on private property. Private property owners do not have the same level of support as public property. And then they're stuck. They get angry. They take matters into their own hands and can act dangerously in taking matters into their own hands. And we've seen that play out. And so where is the onus on if the local governments and the state are pushing off of public land? Where's the responsibility then? Because I think it is unfair on private property owners to take the brunt of it with little support. And I say that because the consequences can be dire.
Good point.
And that's what drives my comment about the Board of Health. Like, that's the only entity I think that could give us a policy and some cover in that situation that would be uniform.
Well, do we want to take that back to the leadership at County Health, or shall we approach the chair of the Board of Health, or what do you guys think?
I think you should let Keely keep working it and on the path she's on, because I feel like she's got our feedback, and then working with alongside folks at the Department of Health may help that with the policy overlay that we might not need the Board of Health. Like, that's the only thought I would have.
I feel okay, Keely?
Yeah. Good.
Okay. Everybody thumbs up or down, okay with that? All right, great. There came another thumb. Thanks, Carolina. All righty. Well, let's keep this on the agenda list, Tom, so that we do check-ins on this periodically. Would like once a month sound about right?
Yeah, we can do that.
All right, and then we can decide during executive committee meetings which agenda it's appropriate for. Okay, well, let's move on to governance. And that's Tom's gonna be on point for that one.
Yeah, and I'm gonna turn this over to Darian and Jacinda again. And I apologize, I have been popping in and out. My internet has been very unstable, so I apologize if that's been disruptive to this meeting. But so Keely's gonna share her screen, and then Darian is gonna talk us through as we try to move forward with the advisory boards.
Great.
Thanks, Tom. Yes, I'm going to talk about the advisory boards. And before I start, I am just so compelled. I want to give a shout out to my colleague, Jacinda Selches. She's just so knowledgeable in all things affordable housing and navigating us through this really tough but needed process of Housing Trust Fund, LIHTC, what we can do to leverage these projects in our community. And I just feel so fortunate to be her colleague. So just want to make point that she's just such an asset to our team. Anyway, Regional Housing Council, here we go. Thank you, Keely. Next slide. Okay, so the team met to talk about how we're going to create these boards and what this is going to look like. So this is a real soft, squishy process that we're hoping we can get the green light from you all to move forward with, but really open to feedback at this time. So we're talking about the Affordable Housing Advisory Board and the Homeless Response Advisory Board. If you can remember in our proposed RHC governance structure, the two boards that would review the funding processes and make their recommendation to the Regional Housing Council. So here's what we've got. Links for the online application for both the RHC advisory boards we posted to the RHC website. We're already in the process of this, creating a form for folks to fill out and for those links to be posted on the RHC website. Really broad distribution for the applications, all of our listservs throughout the county to make sure we get the widest reach that we can to entice a diverse group of folks to apply to be on the boards. Initial recruitment will be in early January, allowing for 3 weeks for this process. The technical team will review applications based on the eligible criteria that we're in the process of creating. We will present those nominations to the RHC. The RHC will approve or deny the recommendations for the boards that we come up with. If they're approved, they will go to the Board of County Commissioners. And upon approval, we will begin the onboarding and training process for the boards. So this is the rough outline for that process that we've created. Next slide. Oh, go ahead, Jason.
Marion, can I ask a
Oh,
quick question? Just, it's more of a sequence thing. Like in the first column, you've got the fourth item, reviewing and scoring applications based on eligibility criteria. Will the criteria be included in the application information?
Yes, that, excuse me, the eligibility criteria will be included in the application. So folks know what we're looking for, what expertise, yeah, what skills, what knowledge base, that will be in the application. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, next slide. Okay, here's our time.
It's not forwarding. Come on.
No, it worked, Keely.
Oh, it did? Where are you now?
I'm on slide 2, just where I want to be.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah. Okay. So next is the timeline, and we base this on the calendar for the RHC meetings. So today we are here to talk about our appointee process for the advisory boards. We're hoping to get some sort of green light to move forward with this, and then we can come back to you on the December 14th meeting with our more dialed in process with those eligibility criteria, with the documents, which is in the next slide, that we'll come back with, and a real tight, polished process for you all to approve at that December 14th meeting. Beginning of the calendar year, the applications will go live. We'll hopefully lean on all of you to send out to any sort of email list that you're on. Really excited for broad distribution of the application to make sure that our boards are all inclusive and a representative of the county. And then the applications will be due the end of the month. Then we'll come back to the RHC to hear staff's recommendations.
Sorry.
Startled me. Review our recommendations, and then the Board of County Commissioners will hear the recommendations from the RHC at the February 21st meeting. Next slide. All right, it worked, Keely. So next steps. Advisory board staff will be finalizing applications for RHC approval. Again, those will come back at the December 14th meeting. Staff will develop the selection criteria, and the criteria initial selection process will include equitable processes. So we really want to take this next month to ensure that what we are evaluating these applications are making sure that are equitable, not just putting as much weight on experience or time spent in the field, but what sort of expertise and knowledge base will be on the board to review our applications and improve our system. And we will be co-creating some documents or elements of the advisory boards to make sure that once the boards are selected, we will have those elements of the process for board support. So we want to develop advisory board behavioral standards to ensure that there is a grievance policy and conflict of interest is addressed. Seeing those go through the county grievance process or relying on county HR doesn't seem sustainable or efficient. So we want to create those that are folded into these advisory boards, ensuring that there isn't a conflict of interest because they're overseeing funds that could influence organizations that we work for. So creating those policies that are prepared for when the board is set up. Making sure that we have the required trainings in place. Currently, Olympia advisory boards have a certain trainings that board members go through. The county has also certain trainings, and do we want them to overlap? Do we want to take from the trainings that we already have at our jurisdictions or create new ones, just including public records requests, overview of funding sources? Do we want our trainings to be a bit of TA to onboard folks appropriately so they know what type of funding sources they will be reviewing? Or is that an expectation coming onto the board? So again, just developing those trainings for board members once they're appointed. And then creating a calendar for this process. So the home fund application will be reviewed in early summer, like Jacinda spoke about earlier, but that might not be a consistent time frame. We may pull it back for that February RFP in future years. So just outlining the calendar for the board, for the next calendar year. So those are all documents that the tech team needs to create to ensure that the boards are set up for success and that we're ready for appointees in February. So that's all I have, and we can answer questions. You're on mute, Carolyn. You're on mute, Carolyn.
Here we go. Jim had his hands up, and I think Keely, was that just a stray hand gesture or? Okay. So Jim, floor is yours.
Thank you. I apologize for the weirdness. My computer just did a blue screen of death. I haven't seen one in years and decided to reboot itself. So Darian, I think that the process makes sense. I have two questions. The first one is, and maybe this is for Romero and Carolina, is there any chance of getting the commission to approve a stipend system for these advisory committees in their budget process they're doing now prior to them being seated? Or is that a much longer term conversation? In my mind, $1,000 from the home fund dedicated to stipends.
Well, it's something that I think we've discussed with all of our committees and that the board has had. We haven't had this conversation about these committees in particular. And I think it's something that we're all willing to have, but we just need to have the conversation. So I don't want to say like yes or no, because we haven't had that conversation as a board yet. But if that's a proposal that the RHC wants to put forward, it's something I'm happy to bring to the board and have that discussion.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think at least if we could get a general nod, but I also think, I don't know that that's, I mean, it's a little bit important to me in the recruitment process, but it's more important to me that it be present, when people sit down for the job. So I think if you can, if people agree that we should ask, maybe you could just run up the flagpole and see if, test the water on it.
Thank you.
And then,
Oh, I was just gonna ask Keely or Tom, can either of you remind me next Tuesday as we're doing the homeless strategies check-in to ask the board about this? So so it doesn't slip in my mind, or at least I have two other people there reminding me on it.
And then
To
go ahead.
speak on your larger question, Councilmember, that's kind of what we're looking for in direction as a whole is, are these boards going to fall under the requirements of the county? Should we just think of those as a county board and they have to follow these? Or is this are these their own boards and we can kind of create and morph them by themselves? That's the direction we're curious about tonight.
Okay, that's helpful. And I think that, that challenge might also depend on what the lawyers think as far as the interlocal and some of that kind of stuff. To me, if we really want to be standalone, we should try to set them up as independently as possible. Though I think even if we were a standalone entity, there's a really good chance that we would be asking the county to be our administrative body for quite some time. So I don't know, even if we went down that road, how fast we would separate something like that. So the other question I had was around the process. I didn't see the word interview there anywhere. And I think that, so the only struggle I have with this is if it's advisory to the RHC, at least at Olympia, the way that happens is a subcommittee of our body does interviews of the applicants and they make a recommendation versus staff making a recommendation. And so like, I lean toward that as a preference, but I also know that's a lot of work, but I also think it's part of our job. So was there thinking around interviews and council, like RHC members in that recommendation versus the tech team?
I think that felt like a huge lift to ask the RHC to do interviews, review applications, and do appointing. But that's something that we can talk more about if that's your preference. No reason why we didn't. We just felt to streamline the process, it would make sense for them to come through tech team. We review applications, make recommendations, and bring them to the board.
Would your process include an in-person or a Zoom interview?
I imagine that they would. Yes.
Okay. Yeah, that would probably be fine with me. I'm wrestling with it a little bit, but I think based on the trust we've built here with everyone, that can make sense, as long as the interview is as significant in the criteria as the written application. I think from a equity standpoint, I don't want to have it be too weighted towards the writing. So thank you. Awesome.
Good point. Okay, Jacinda has her hand raised.
Thanks, Carolyn. Just wanted, kind of went through the slides very quickly and wanted to make sure that we touched on the fact that the boards that are being set up now in this process, those boards will not be set up in time for the front end of the request for proposals, excuse me, that happens in February, where our capital and our homeless services funding is put out to the public. That would not include home fund. But the hope is at the back end. So when we get to that April, May timeframe, applications are in and they're being reviewed, and these boards would be up and able to review those applications and make funding recommendations. And then for the Affordable Housing Advisory Board, again, we had talked earlier about having that first round of applications in June of 2023. So the Affordable Housing Advisory Board would essentially be, kind of having some very close back-to-back funding processes happening. But wanted to make sure, that we're being clear in how these boards fit into the timing as we're talking about next year's funding processes. And also wanted to mention, I can't recall who it was who asked about eligibility criteria. When we are putting together the application, which Keely has a draft of, if anyone is interested in throwing that up, referred back to the draft charter that we have presented to you all over the last 2 meetings. So within that charter, there's some eligibility criteria, and then also looked at Olympia's existing home fund application and tried to kind of incorporate both of those and identify any areas that needed a little bit more work.
Pardon me. All righty, thank you. Any other discussion on this one? You guys are easy. Okay. So this is down for an action item here. Are you all ready to put this to a vote?
And I think the ask was not kind of a formal, I think more kind of a thumbs up kind of vote. We're not looking for a formal motion, but just continuing to move forward on the path that was presented. I think the feedback we've gotten is good. So I think in December, there'll be a formal request to kind of approve the documents, the criteria and whatnot. So I think more we're looking for the green light thumbs up than a formal action.
All right. Well, can I see thumbs up or don't know or thumbs down from our voting members?
Commissioner Mejia just stepped out of the Zoom. She'll be back here in a minute, but I can assume she has a thumbs up on this.
Okay. I'm not seeing Michael.
I've been waving my thumb up frantically,
Oh,
Carolyn.
you have, okay. I think you just weren't on my screen. Thank you. And Jim, was that a thumb up on your end?
Yes.
Okay. Thumb up on mine.
I really appreciate the speed that we're moving on this. It's cool. So I know it's a big lift for the staff team. So thank you.
Can I ask what the motion was, please?
No formal motion. It's just a kind of a thumbs up general agreement that we're moving in the right direction and that this will come back to our council probably, did you say December, Tom? December.
Yes.
Okay.
And that Carolina has to do most of it.
Yeah, while you were out of the room.
No thumbs down on that.
Okay. Good. So does that get you where you need to be, Tom and company
Yes, that's great. Thank you.
on that? Okay. Very good. Well, boy, we're being really efficient time-wise. So we have a little extra time if we need it for good of the order, and if we don't, maybe we can end early. So does anybody have anything they'd like to share? Not seeing any hands up.
I've got my hand
Keely
up.
has her hand up.
Oh, Keely's got her hand up. Okay.
Just really quickly, we're moving into planning for the point in time count for 2023. I know that Ariel Benson from our office has been meeting with jurisdictions. One question I had for you all is, I'm hoping that we can do, I know the city of Olympia, when they were spearheading the PIT, had like a coat and warm clothing drive. If each of the jurisdictions would be interested in having like a warm clothing drive for the PIT. So, and the way it looked at the city of Olympia was at City Hall, there was like a big red tub and people could come in and just drop some socks and hats in it as they desired. So if that's something you all would be interested in or willing to, the PIT team would be coordinating that I would be coordinating that. So,
We're happy to do that, Keely.
Yeah. Likewise, we are too, and I know our CRU MOT also have supplies of that they also use that we can also incorporate to this effort, to the drive.
Great.
Okay. And so we just kind of pool it and then the volunteers would take it out with them.
Yeah, we'll work out a pickup. We'll work out an actual plan. We don't have it written down yet, but I just wanted to take this opportunity to ask since we're all here.
Yeah, no, it's a lovely idea.
Well, I imagine we might be able to put something at the Olympia Center too, possibly. And then just, it might be a fun competition. How many items can we get?
Buddy up, little friendly competition. Okay, well, I guess we can think on that a little bit. Good deal.
Carolyn, I'd like to know from our people if that we're interested in this. Tumwater hasn't weighed in. Is this something we will participate in, or we want to do, or put something in our building, our foyer, competing departments, other things we've done for drives?
Yeah, we could certainly do that.
I'd like to see us do it.
Okay.
Okay.
The winning jurisdiction has to pay for lunch.
For all.
At an in-person RHC meeting.
Isn't that an incentive to not be the winning jurisdiction?
Yeah, right.
Don't you want the
it
winning
might
jurisdiction to
be-
get the free lunch?
There might be the incentive so you can decide what's for lunch.
Oh,
There you
that's true. Though we'll probably all pick miso anyway, but
Exactly.
That's funny. Anybody else have anything they'd like to share?
Thanks, John.
Just look at the list here. I don't see any electronic raised hands. Anybody want to wave if they have anything else they'd like to share? All right,
Oh, actually, I have one thing, Carolyn.
okay.
Can we make sure that we get a chance to say goodbye to Scott Spence at one of these meetings? Because I know he's having a lot of change in his workload, but he really spent a lot of time and thought helping us get to the point we're at today. And I want to make sure we have a chance to acknowledge him.
I think
Can you
that's
pass that
lovely.
along?
So Rick, could you kind of check with Scott and see which of our meetings he might be likely to?
I will coordinate that, yes.
Okay. He hasn't announced his departure date yet, but kind of the general mid-December-ish. He wanted to see us through the budget process. So, but thank you, Jim. That's really thoughtful.
We've been to a lot of meetings together. So.
Tom has his hand up.
Yeah. Tom?
Yeah, that just reminded me, I wanted to remind everyone for November and December, there's only one RHC meeting per month because our meeting would fall on the Wednesday before Thanksgiving. We didn't think you wanted to spend Friday, Wednesday before Thanksgiving, and also right after Christmas. So the first meeting of the month, it will be a 2-hour meeting, but that will be the only meeting of the month. So the first November meeting and the first December meeting will be the RHC meetings for November and December.
Thank you for that, Tom. And I would say to our co-chair, Carolina, I have a lot meeting that follows our first meeting of the month, which is second Wednesday. So my plan is to go to the lot board conference room and try to attend this meeting from there in order to attend the first in-person lot meeting of the year there. So if there are some technical issues, I'll try to get word to you, but I may need to ask you to chair.
Okay, I got you. No worries.
All right, thanks. I've never tried to do a Zoom out of that building, so I have no idea how, what we'll be looking at. Although people who
Their Wi-Fi is really good. We've had a lot of retreats in there. I think you'll be fine.
Okay, should be good. Okay, good. All righty. Well, Tom, thank you for that reminder about the November and December calendars. So I guess everybody gird yourself with for a couple of fuller meetings, but it'll be good. All right. Well, if there's nothing else, why don't we adjourn a little early and enjoy the last few minutes of daylight. Okay. All right. Take care, everybody.